So, thanks, Liana. So just wanted to get grounded, that as we've all been meeting and talking, as we've all been meeting and talking, I'm not sure we've actually talked about, and if there are questions, please feel free to like unmute, or I'll also try to keep a check on the chat. Or Liana, if you want to let me know, please do so. We've actually talked about like what cooperatives are, or like had a central idea as we've all met. I just realized this the other day. But just kind of wanted to get grounded on this before moving on. So, cooperatives, and this is a definition from Dr. Jessica Gordon-Emhart's book, Collective Courage. Quick plug, there's a group called Repaired Nations. I'll try to find the link later. They're out in Oakland. They do some really cool work, decolonized, cooperative work. They also have a reading club, a book club for collective courage. I think they meet online and via Instagram. And also they have some cool cooperative trips that are also decolonized. So if you want to check them out, that's a great way to engage. But anyway, so she talks about cooperatives as these companies or entities that are owned by the people who use their services. And so these would be the member owners that form the company for a particular purpose, to satisfy an economic or social need, to provide a quality good or service at an affordable price, to create an economic structure, to engage in production, or to facilitate more equal distribution to compensate for market failure. Now, I will say, I will send these slides afterwards, like feel free to like use them. I will say that I like Dr. Jessica Gordon-Emhart's definition of cooperatives compared to like the ICA groups, which LaDonna had talked about, the Rochdale pioneers and, all that racism and all that stuff. Because she talks about market failure. And market failure, I think when she talks about it, is important because like Black people were not included in the market, and so they found their own way to build a market through cooperation or cooperatives, or cooperatism, as I've also heard it called. So like things like the Underground Railroad, mutual aid societies, or like the Free African Society, or all these other things that we've been learning about and tapping into. Or if you remember like the Cooperative Gallery Walk, or like Credophon in St. Paul, like the social clubs, like these were to compensate for creating our own markets. And so that's what you're doing. You're creating your own market. You're recognizing there's a need. You're creating a space, you're filling a gap. And so that's what this cooperative entity is about. So I'm just, I just wanted to get grounded again on like this cooperative definition. And then just to reiterate that, they come in different forms. We have housing co-ops, CLTs, land co-ops, worker co-ops. We have the Bike Hub here, Mandela Foods Grocery in Oakland, which is a Black-owned grocery store. They have like so many things, but they also have like things from community members that they make. So like if I made soaps, I could sell my stuff at Mandela Foods Grocery Store. Producer co-ops, like Land O'Lakes is a producer-owned cooperative. Investment co-ops, we've heard from NICE, the Northside Cooperative Investment Cooperative Enterprise, credit unions, lending circles, SUSUs, lending clubs, and then consumer co-ops, which Costco is a consumer co-op, technically speaking. Ethically speaking, this is recorded, never mind. REI is a consumer co-op, and then like here in the Twin Cities, we'll have like, the Sewards, Mississippi Markets, consumer co-ops, where everyone will have like a member share, so you buy into it and essentially get some kind of discounts. Like my partner and I like to go at the end of the quarter because we know that we'll get like a big discount versus going at different times. So these are just like different ways, but cooperatives exist in multiple other forms. There are artist co-ops, and there are ways that we cooperate formally and informally, and this is just one way that they look. And I just wanted to get grounded in this once again before we move into like some of the formal structures. Um, and also just kind of wanted to talk more about this, but when we think about housing cooperatives and what they look like, but housing cooperatives really form when people kind of come together on a democratic basis to own and control housing or community facility where they live. It's a not-for-profit cooperative corporation, and housing cooperatives can be made affordable and still allow for individual home equity. Now I'll put a star here because they're not always affordable. You can have market rate co-ops. And when I think of market rate co-ops, I always think of like the New York cooperatives, like, a nice co-op overlooking like Central Park. And those are like at market rate. So like whatever the market is at that time, that's what the co-op is worth. You could have cooperatives like Match Co-op here. They are low to no income. And I don't know what the monetary value is. So low to no income. So really it depends on like how the cooperative structures their governance and agrees on like the buy-in, which we'll talk about a little more. And then you could have like limited equity, which I did send those slides, but I realized I never talked about those, like limited equity cooperatives, where it's essentially the members pay for a share, not their unit, a share. So like your share could be $1,000, and that's how much you get out when you leave, but you never get out any more or any less. So housing cooperatives use an ownership agreement for affordability or inaffordability if it's market rate. Co-op members own shares. Share owner entities share ownership entitles members to occupy a unit in the cooperative and gives them a say in the governance of the cooperative. One member, one vote all the time, regardless of how much money you put in. If you own more shares, which Benjamin talked about, like class B, D, C shares, it is always one member, one vote. And co-ops must also meet the cooperative's financial maintenance and other obligation with membership fees. So like you'd have to also, for example, Park Co-op it's on Park here. I think I just saw, there was a listing actually when we started North Star in October. For a 2-bedroom apartment, it was, I think, $900 because they're still a co-op. So $900 for a 2-bedroom apartment. And then the obligations for the co-op is that you have to like clean the laundry room. You have to like do some yard work, mow the grass, kind of like still give in to the co-op in some way, shape, or form that like makes up for that monetary parts. And then co-ops the buy-in amounts is established in the bylaws. So that low to no income, that's all established in the bylaws. So really the cooperative governance is really about how you choose to set up the space and how you operate your cooperative. It exists in all of this. It's in the mission and vision of the cooperative. It's in the cooperative strategy and the business strategy. It's like in how you manage and structure the cooperative. It's about setting policies and procedures of the cooperative. It's about decision-making structures, and it's about like the evaluation. So like when setting up the cooperative, like it's really about like what values you want to put into the cooperative. I think earlier we talked about like these power dynamics, and just kind of wanted to start thinking about like what you want to put into your cooperative, because that's going to be reflective of your governance structure. And so if we think about cooperativism, like you could easily have a co-op that is hierarchical, and maybe that's what their values are. So if your values are not to value hierarchy, then do not put that in your governance structure. Do not put that in your bylaws. But if that's what you value, then put that in there. If your value is to value liberation, then making sure that that's reflected in your mission and vision, and then that's part of your governance structure. If you value, I don't know, water for all, if you value, I don't know, if you value equity for all, and I know that's very broad, then making sure that's like reflected in your mission and vision. So really, it's cooperative broadly speaking. This is how governance shows up in your cooperative work. I want to go back to this governance piece about one member, one vote. So every member has one vote in the election of a board member in major decisions. And this fun like drawing is from Salk. Excuse me. So regardless of how much money you have, does not mean there's more power. Everyone has one member, one vote. If you have like more, if you buy more shares, like we'll talk more about preferred stock in a moment. Regular shares are referred to as common shares. So if you have common shares, that is one power, one vote, one member, one vote. If you have preferred stock, it's one member, one vote, unless those preferred stocks are like not non-voting stock shares. So that is how the cooperative is kind of set up. Before I move on, I just kind of want to get a temperature check to see how people are and how things are landing so far.
Nakuli, this is really fascinating. I I don't think I realized that all cooperatives, like regardless of the style or structure or setup, that like one member, one vote still applied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think I was going to share in the next slide. Yeah, that's regardless of what it is. And yeah, I think I was going to share in the next slide. I think I'm like getting ahead of myself a little. I'm like part of an emerging investment cooperative in like the creative enterprise zone of like St. Paul. So it like starts like where 280 is to kind of like where Menards is. And so they were thinking of like having corporations on there, since it is an investment co-op that will be buying up buildings essentially to like maintain affordability for artists. That's the main goal. But like we're gonna need money. And so they were thinking of like, well, what if we have corporations, people that represent corporations on the board? And so there was all this discussions, I think for like an hour, we discussed like we could only have like one member of a corporation on the board at a time. Because like, let's say we had more, like the example I used was like Menards. Like, let's say like the whole board was Menards, because then Menards could then decide like how the cooperative moved versus like how the people wanted it to move that were not representative of Menards. Because then it could just be called Menard, like, I don't know, creative enterprise zone would be like Menards plus, I don't know, something ridiculous like that. So yeah, one member, one vote.
And that will be written in the bylaws.
Yes, that would be written in the bylaws. Now, there are instances where I think that comes later too, where you could decide on joint, like joint shares. Well, not what. Never mind. One member, one vote. Well, yes, that would be written in the bylaws. I'll talk about shares in like another section. I'm also getting ahead of myself with this. For joint shares. But yes, one member, one vote, and this will be written in the bylaws, which we will be talking about bylaws soon too. Okay. And I feel like I had more for this in my PowerPoint, and so I'm trying to find my notes just so I'm not missing anything, but I will move on for now. So some of the things too in the governance structure is really about creating a clear process for governance. And so I know this is kind of, these parts feel kind of like, no, I don't know, like things that I feel throw away, but they're important. And so it's things like procedures for meetings. So like for Robert's rules, like, is that important for you? It's like, who is Robert? Do you like Robert's rules? Does this work for your cooperative? It's like an example that I like is like Mandela Foods grocery store. They don't operate with Robert's rules because they found that like that does not work for their cooperative. So if that's something that you don't like, it's like putting that as part of like your governance structure. Agendas. Do you like using agendas? Is that helpful for you? And so like that's part of the governance structure. And I think this piece is just making sure that the cooperative like runs and that you're not caught in this like continuous like meeting about governance continuous meeting about governance where you don't get anywhere ultimately. So just like making some making some decisions about like what you want and how you want it so that you can move forward. So yes, this might be, like I said, throwaway, but it's kind of it ends up being important in like putting together some kind of governance structure for your cooperative. So some parts too is like making and reviewing or adopting procedures for your cooperative, like how you make decisions. I feel like I've heard Lupine talk about sociocracy. So is that an important decision factor? Democratically making decisions, consensus, committees. Do you have someone in your cooperative who is always talking and you feel like is like making decisions, and so like that's where the group then leans to the person that's always making decisions? Or do you feel like there's a better way where you could hear everyone speak and have everyone's perspectives? Or do you have people that you know that, I don't know, this is what Lane brings, and so this is Lane's strength, so this is what Lane will be moving. This is what Liana brings, so this is what Liana will be bringing. This is what Mujahid brings, this is what Mujahid will be moving. And in the events that any of these people move or leave the co-op, what will happen in that aspect? So just making decisions about that too. Electing a governing body and committees, like, is that something important for you? Do you want to be called president, chair, homie? Like, what's important for you? And it's about like spelling these things out, because like, let's say I create a cooperative and I do not want that language in my co-op because that's not my value. I don't want to ever have like presidents or chairs or whatever in my co-op. And then someone new comes in the co-op and they're like, well, I actually like using that language. Does that then take away from like the foundational values of the cooperative? So these are all things to think about. Voting rights. What are the voting rights for the cooperative? Is, for example, for the co-op that I'm part of, one of the things we were talking about is like having a seat for tenants so that they have a voting right. So like always having a seat. One of the things that they did not discuss is like having a seat for artists, because that's supposed to be the people that are represented in this group. So like, where does that leave artists? And like I said, no more than one corporation be represented on the board, and that Bernard's example. Yeah. What are the procedures for amending governing documents? Like, does one person just decide, like, I don't like this, we're just gonna throw it away and scrap it? Or do we all have to meet and decide on the language and change it and move forward? Do we have to meet with a lawyer and decide what we want to do? Or do we trust each other to change the language together? So like, these are all the things to think about and have in the bylaws. And I know it's tenuous, but I think in the long run, in the long run, it'd be worthwhile. And yeah, just don't get overwhelmed. Just take it step by step, and moving along with your cooperative group is like part of it too. Things like membership. What does membership in your cooperative look like, right? Have you thought about that? Is it an all-Black cooperative? Is that what you want to do? Is it open to folks? Is it like North Star? It centers Black people, but it's open to everyone. What does that look like? If things do happen, how do you feel like you might address that? Will there be scholarship amounts for the buy-in to make the cooperative accessible? Is it low to no income? Like, what does that look like? Is it open to anyone in your geography? Is your cooperative in Georgia, but open to people in Minnesota, perhaps, so they can come to the farm and play with your rabbits? I don't know. Are there conflict of interest policies? So these are kind of like the governing pieces, the details, just some of them. This is not an exhaustive list at all to think about. And I will say, you don't have to create these processes for governance from the beginning. If there are cooperatives out there that you like, and I will say, if there are cooperatives out there that you like, you could be looking at their governance pieces and like emulating them or thinking about them, or even taking a look at them. if they'll allow you to, and learning from them and using them for your cooperative group. So that's one way to go about it too. So you don't have to start from the beginning. I'm always a fan of using something that's already in existence. So not starting from the beginning, especially when there's already something out there. Anything for this part before I move on?
A quick question.
Yes.
So I've seen like weird amounts of discrimination lawsuits for folks who say that like you can't be specifically for one race, specifically when it comes to Black folks. I know that we go up against all kinds of mess, and folks want to like sue us for discrimination and whatever else. Even even that bill to give relief for the Black farmers that faced all that discrimination. I mean, if y'all were following it, it was blocked at almost every step from white farmers who thought they were losing power. So I'm wondering like how, and maybe this is a broader question, how does this work legally? So if you were to say like, yeah, like for your example, like if you were to say like this is a Black only cooperative, how is that legal, or how does that work?
That's a great question. I feel like I'm thinking of like Root Spring, which like it's like they say they are a BIPOC cooperative, or they center BIPOC. So I think like maybe not saying Black only, maybe that's how you get around it. Or when you say like center, because I feel like that's what the words we use. We like say center, and that's when maybe you can get around it. But I can look more into it too, and ask some folks at Nexus, for sure. But yeah, I don't fully know right now. But with thinking like, the co-ops that we have, like 40 Acre, and I mean, there are co-ops in existence that are Black. I'm trying to think if they use Black only in their language. Maybe they don't explicitly. So maybe not, I don't know. I don't want to like deter you. They might not use that Black only language, but I feel like centering Blackness in their piece, or even like I guess Chloe won't be here anymore, but like with IX, like they center like Black and Latinx or BIPOC in their work. So I feel like getting around the only part is like by saying centering for Minnesota, even though I feel like sometimes we do get randomly some folks that will be mad at us, mostly via Facebook, but we can ignore that. Not so much in lawsuits, but I do understand like that question or that air of caution around lawsuits, but I can look into it some more too. But yeah, I do understand that air of caution. So I'll come back for sure. Anything else? Okay. Okay, so moving on to cooperative governance. Okay, so for cooperative governance structure, for some reason, cooperatives end up like looking at like nonprofit or for-profit governance. So this is one, I have two examples, but you're not beholden to these examples. So this is an example from Project Equity, where so you have a membership of people, and so the members elects the board of directors, and so it could be that is literally just the board of directors that are from the membership itself, or you could have some board of directors that are not from the membership at all. So For example, like I believe EBREC has this, but I'm not sure. There are some organizations that will have some board of directors that are not part of the organization itself. And then the board of directors then hires the manager, if you do have a manager for your cooperative group. And then the board of director like implements directives for the membership. So this is one kind of governance structure, very much similar to like a nonprofit structure, but you're not beholden to it. Another structure is this one, which I love, which you have a collective board where every member in the cooperative is on the board and gets to make decisions about the cooperative. So one of these is like Arizmendi Bakery. It's out in California. And another one is, I think, Rainbow Grocery Stores. And that one is, this one, Arizmendi has 20 worker owners. Rainbow Grocery Store, I think, has over like 100 worker owners. And so then they have like committees of people. But essentially, like every member gets to be on the board. So every member gets to deal with the financial things, deal with like everything the board has to deal with. And so, yeah. So these are the two types of board structures that I could offer you. But like I said, you're not beholden to these. Whichever way you want to structure your board is, or you want to think about structuring your board. You could have the board is like the founding members, which is the folks that are in your cooperative group right now, either taking this cooperative class or the ones that maybe are taking it and couldn't be here on Saturdays. And then as people join the cooperative group, maybe those are, I don't know, those are some of the people you bring into the board or you don't bring into the board. Kind of depends on like how you're thinking about this work. And so as you're thinking about this work, have you thought about like what that founding member or organizing board might look like? About it more? Cool. Okay, we're gonna take a 10-minute break. Maybe think about that a little. Collective board structure. Oh, what is confusing? If you'd like to share. Also, I know there's a 10-minute break, so you can also share later. How about we take the 10-minute break and then we come back after 10 minutes. We'll talk about articles of incorporation and bylaws. I'll do a little digging into your last question, Lane, and then we'll come back, yeah, do the articles of incorporation, bylaws, and we'll do a little activity and then close out and do some and go into break. So we'll come back at 11:12. So I'll stop here for now. Thanks. Okay, for your question, Lane, before the break, about the suing, like I said, I do understand the caution. I will say that for the co-ops, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll say refer to a lawyer for sure. But I will say there are co-ops that are Black or BIPOC specific. So, but I do understand the need to proceed with caution. So I think I maintain that part. I don't know if I fully answered that question yet. I think I'm also proceeding a little bit with caution on the answer. Okay, moving on to cooperatives and articles of incorporation and bylaws. So this is the last part before we kind of move into some activity. Yeah. Oh, I think a bit of the slide kind of got cut off there. Okay. So the articles of incorporation, so this is all part of the cooperative. So let's say now you kind of have the governance pieces kind of put together. And so now you'll be working, this is the part where you'll be working with a lawyer, and plug for the alumni fund. please make sure to like tap the alumni fund to work with the lawyer. So you essentially would register the name of your cooperative and talk about the physical address of your cooperative. The articles of incorporation would also ask that you outline your capital infrastructure. So it would talk about like what kind of shares you have. Are they common shares, which would be like the buy-in amounts? So is it like $50, which is like I think how much it is for NICE members, $50 share, or $1,000 or $10,000? Like I don't know how much money you are hoping to move in this cooperative. Or preferred shares, which is like a preferred ownership, which these are different shares that you could offer in your co-op for voting or non-voting members. For example, Root Spring Co-op offers preferred shares for equity in their cooperative. And so I'm not, okay, I just know for sure that Root Spring does. I don't know for other co-ops. So for example, like an organization or an entity can essentially pay into the cooperative to help with the equity, and then but you'd be a non-voting member. So this is just another way for a cooperative to get equity or get money in the co-op. And then the articles of incorporation would also include like provisions on how the cooperative will operate. So a statement for the cooperative purpose, any restrictions, or any other provisions necessary for their cooperative. I just want to double check if I'm missing anything else since that got cut off. Nope, that was all 3. Okay. And then the cooperative bylaws. So the cooperative bylaws are essentially, so this is all the governance pieces, right? So now you've all put all of these things together, you've muddled through them, you've decided what you want, what you don't want, all the values, what's best for you, what's meaningful to you, what doesn't work for you. So these are co-created by the co-founding members. And then must be reviewed regularly to make sure that they don't need to be updated, or if they do need to be updated, let's say like, I don't know if language needs to be changed, if the cooperative is using the term BIPOC, or like let's say like we're using the term POC, but now the language is BIPOC and maybe the language is something else. So things like that, because language is always evolving and changing. So that's just one example. So the cooperative bylaws, these are the 4 parts, the big chunks of things. There's other things too that would be included, but the cooperative name, location, and the year of incorporation. And then also the common or preferred shares. So that would also include like setting member, owner, and shareholder prerequisites. So like, does it allow for joint shares? So if you have like a partner situation, do they allow for a joint share, or does it only allow for like individual shares in the cooperative? It also like determines how people can leave the co-op. Can they just like peace out, or is there a process for that? Do you want to like, I don't know, host a party for them, or do you want to like sign a document saying, all right, we acknowledge that this person is now leaving the cooperative? And then also this part would also determine how the profits and the surplus will be shared at the end of the fiscal year. Will some of this profit and surplus go back to the cooperative to help maintain the co-op? Do you need to, I don't know, buy a new lawnmower for the cooperative? Do you need some more seeds to plant in the cooperative? Or do you just want to take some of that surplus and patronage and just have it split amongst the cooperative members? And I don't know, you all go buy a beautiful new plant for yourselves. Whatever that is, that needs to be established in the bylaws. Just so, because if anything happens, a new member comes in and they decide, well, I want all the shares at the end of the year. the surplus at the end of the year to go to me. That could that could easily happen. So that just needs to be established in those bylaws. And it's tedious, it takes time, but it's just better if it's spelled out beforehand. Another thing that's in the bylaws is like board and member meetings. Like, what does it take to have quorum? Do you want quorum? Like, is it 2/3 or is it 1/5 or is it majority? Does one person need to be there to have quorum? Like, how do you want those decisions to be made? How do you want to have notice of meetings? Is just a text fine? How do you want those election processes to be held? Like, what's important to you? And then also, like, how do you want to set space for the board of directors? Do you want to have a board of directors? Do you want to be called board of directors? Is that something that is that language of value to you? What other language do you want to use in your cooperative? So those are some of the things that would be spelled out in your cooperative bylaws. And then lastly, making changes to the co-op. So like, how do you change, appeal, or replace bylaws? So let's say, for example, the example I gave is like, let's say you said this bylaw, this cooperative centers POC people, but now it centers BIPOC people. How do you establish that you make that change? That has to be spelled out in the bylaws. And then also dissolving the cooperative. One of the things, I don't know if you remember Tia from Frogtown Neighborhood Association. She came to talk about Wilder Square Co-op and that story of like, how people didn't even know that they lived in a cooperative, and this company was trying to come in and essentially like buy out the co-op and dissolve the co-op, this Black and Brown owned co-op in Wilder. And so like, it needs to be spelled out like how you dissolve the cooperative, because if the founding members do eventually move on to other things and other people come up behind you and want to continue the cooperative, they need to know like what it would take to dissolve the co-op if they ever wanted to, or wanted to protect themselves against someone who did that. So, and I mean, also just thinking about like the North Star cooperative history. I mean, if we think about like Fannie Lou Hamer and like the hog farm, if we think about like all these other things that we've had so many like cooperative disruptions in our history, like Black cooperative disruptions that have been like out of like definitely disrupted by white supremacy for sure. So just like just keeping those things in mind. So like how you want to dissolve the co-op, but like just making those plans too, for whatever is in your power, that you can hold to be spelled out, so that someone doesn't come in and disrupt the work that you're working to build. And that's what I have before moving into the sharing agreement exercise that kind of like walks through some of these things. I'm gonna stop sharing so I could see everyone and we could talk about some questions or comments and discussion. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion?
Just processing. It's a lot of to consider.
Yeah, for sure.
What you said earlier about taking it one step at a time is like ringing pretty loud for me.
Yeah. I like I said, I just joined this co-op and I joined it on the later end, the end of stages, and they had already like gone through all the bylaws. Like they just incorporated, so like I missed all of this part, and And even then, like we're still going back through the bylaws and like figuring stuff out, and it's just it's the conversations are good and interesting. So yeah, for sure, taking it one step at a time and like parsing through things, and just always knowing that you can go back and fix things and reevaluate. I always think back to the cooperative development fellowship with the cards, where I think it was Farm Called Home. They were like they put evaluate at like every stage. You can always go back and evaluate at every stage. Like if this feels good for you, if this is aligning with your values, if this speaks to you and your cooperative work, and like yeah, and being like, is this still like something we want to do? Is this like the step that we still want to take in terms of like whatever path you're taking? So
Yeah, I like that. Evaluate at every step. And
and if you're working with, I don't know, someone that is not really hearing you or seeing your or feeling the vibes you're not vibing with, then you're like, no. And finding that person that is gonna be there to make sure that they hear your vision and see what your vision is to make sure that you're getting what you need for your co-op. And the other thing I will add, which I don't think I added, was Dr. Jessica Gordon Nemhart always talks about the most important thing. One of the most important things in this cooperative work is membership education, and it doesn't stop. It never ends. So that's always important. It's in the beginning, it's in the end, it's in the middle. So as you do this work too, and as you bring people into your cooperative work, it's continuous education because they may not know your vision, your values. So membership education is always important.
yeah, I was having a conversation with a potential uh cooperator, and he wanted to come out. He wanted to spend a lot of time on the land and kind of sort of like get in on the ground floor and just roll your sleeves up and start getting work done. And that sounded like really good, but what I found was that it was just difficult to say, like, well, let's stop and let's get to know one another. Right? Can we have a conversation? Can we? And that seemed foreign to him. Like let's no, let's just do this work. I was like no, let's get to know each other. Let's establish a relationship so that we know that we can, vibe together. So yeah, that really something that stands out about, like, finding your people and making sure that everything's a good fit.
Yeah, for sure. And if the relationship building is important to you, then that's what's important. So come in, have some tea first before we do the work. So I want to know what you're about. So yeah. Yeah, Lane. So it's nonprofit and for profit randomly. Um, I don't know if I mentioned that because um I don't know if I got into ESOPs, and I don't want to like go down a rabbit hole because there's also like yeah, they yeah, because of the board structure, they kind of mirror like nonprofits and for profits in this way. But this is your cooperative work. Like I said, you get to decide what you want to do with it and how you want to run it. So if that's not like the vibe, then that's not the vibe. Then maybe you can decide like how you want to make sure that the governance pieces are still carried out and maybe call it something else. I don't know, methods of accountability. I'm not really sure. Yeah. So but yeah, with the ESOP piece, just before I let it go, there's the another piece of I don't want to call it cooperativism, but there's employee stock ownership, well, P ESOP. Uh, I always have it and then I don't have it. Employee stock ownership program process, but essentially it's like when it's companies like Google a lot of healthcare companies, because my sister, like Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is called something else now, but essentially like the people that work in that company can have access to stock options, but they don't have a say in how that company operates. So people often confuse it as a form of a cooperative, but I mean, if you don't have access, you can't say how you want it to run. It's not a cooperative, but yeah, ESOP plan. Thank you. Thank you so much, Liana. I think that's also where it comes from with the for-profit, with the like the board and all those other things. So okay. So we have about 15 minutes and I don't want to lose any more, like some more time to so I'm gonna see how many people. Okay, I'm just gonna split people into 3 groups. I think 3 groups, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I have this document. This is from SALC, the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Really amazing organization out in Oakland. They do a lot of legal work, a lot of legal clinics and other things too. So if you're in group 1, group 2, group 3, essentially it's this shared housing document that goes through like different shared housing agreements or shared co-housing agreements, different ways to make decisions together. And so I just want you to take like the next 15 minutes, like filling out as much as you would like. You can essentially apply this to anything. You could apply it to your cooperative, your CLT, your investment cooperative. You could apply it if you have roommates, your partner, whatever. But I just wanted to basically, you'll be in random groups. I thought you'd be in your cooperative groups, but you just don't have enough right now. So we'll just go through groups of 3, kind of fill out, just think about your cooperative work, collaborate, and then we'll come back at 11:45 and we'll go into a 40-minute break before we kind of come back and hear the incredible Noni Session speak. So, and I'll hop into different breakout rooms just to answer any questions. But the documents are provided and they should be open. Recreate. Cool. So, yep. All right. I'm putting you into 3 breakout rooms. I'm just saying, I know it's just slightly confusing because people are in different groups, but I will send this out as the Google Doc itself. I hope it's a helpful tool anyway in thinking about governance so that you could do it with your group. So yeah, it'll be there again as a Google Doc. I mean, as a Google slide. But please go eat, chill out, shovel snow if you have to shovel snow. Please don't if you don't want to. We'll be back. I think I don't know what time, Liana. Sorry.
Like
With
12:25-ish. I know we're a little.
Noni Sessions. Oh my God, she is such a great speaker. The last time she spoke was for graduation, and with the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, like some really cool work out in Oakland. So yeah, please come back. Yeah, we'll see you soon at 12:25. So yeah, we'll be back. All right. If folks are back from break, could you let me know by like a reaction or giving a camera? Cool. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Hope you had some good food during the break, some rest, time to process things from this morning. I see our afternoon speakers here. Grateful. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Liana.
Thank you. Welcome, Noni. Thank you for being with us. Just to let you know, we also had Chloe Jackson was to join us, but she's under the weather today, so she can't make it. So you'll just be joining us. But thank you. I'm just gonna quickly introduce you and then I'll pass it off to you. Let us know if you need us to make you a co-host or do anything of that sort. But yeah, welcome, Noni. So Noni Session is a 3rd generation West Oaklander cultural anthropologist, and the executive director of EBREC, which supports BIPOC and allied communities to finance, purchase, occupy, and steward collectively owned land and housing. As a third-generation Oakland native, Noni has a personal interest in improving the conditions of low-income Bay Area neighborhoods where race, disenfranchisement, and environmental injustice intersect. Noni builds new pathways for ameliorating resource disparities, such as building cooperative networks and opportunities for collective economic action. Welcome, Noni. Thank you for joining us. Glad you could be here.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have to admit I'm a little unprepared as you told me there was going to be another speaker.
I understand, no
Yeah,
problem.
so I thought I was going to be feeding back on their presentation.
Okay,
So maybe you could orient me to the
Sure.
topic today and what you've done so far. And then make some suggestions about how you'd like me to respond to today's topic, and then let me know how long
yeah,
space you'd like for me to take up. That'd be
no
super great.
problem. Yeah, and apologies. So this morning, we got an email that she wasn't feeling well. So I'm sorry we weren't able to connect before. But honestly, so Nikuli walked us through kind of an overview around cooperative governance and bylaws, how to kind of go about that. I don't know if Nikuli, you want to speak to that briefly, and then I can kind of jump into what Chloe was going to share briefly. If you
Yeah,
mind.
sure.
Okay.
And my apologies for that, for sure. And I will say that thank you so much for coming back to the North Star space. I mean, definitely enjoyed having you for graduation a couple years ago now. Still talk about that, still think about that. So yeah, this morning we had the opportunity to talk about governance and bylaws. We kind of started off our conversation talking about power and power dynamics and how they show up either in the cooperative sphere, outside of the cooperative sphere. And just kind of like breaking down that conversation. So in the North Star space right now, we have 6 cooperative groups. A few folks are represented. We have a farm called Home, Cultural Crops Co-op, Black Prosperity Group, and Lupine. I'm sorry if I missed anyone, but I think that was everyone. And so we had a chance to talk about governance and how that looks like, and the nitty bitty pieces of like all those things, like, boards, and maybe you don't want to be called a board of directors, maybe you want to be called something else, voting rights, what that looks like in terms of accessibility, and also like shares and all those things. We also talked briefly about like articles of incorporation and bylaws too. Now, those were kind of some big topics for us. So I think during the break, I did get some questions about kind of breaking some stuff down about what that looks like. And I know with EBREC, there's that beautiful kind of photo related governance and bylaws pieces that you all use to talk about the governance and bylaws piece. So I don't know if that's a way to kind of plug into this conversation too. Because yeah, it feels, for me, it feels kind of abstract when we talk about this work. So but I will say that there was a question too about like having all Black cooperatives and what that means legally, especially when folks are getting sued, especially farmers. So those were some of the questions and things that were kind of coming up in the space as well. I don't know if that helps set some space.
And then just to talk about Chloe, so she works with Sky Without Limits Cooperative and United Renters for Justice, or IX, and she was just going to share kind of a personal story of her journey around organizing, and they're, in the beginning stages, I believe, so they are still kind of working things out themselves. So, I think, yeah, getting a concrete example of what it can look like to go through that governance process and create bylaws, and just really talk about, challenges, things that have come up, things that have worked well, just kind of getting a real tangible example of what you all are doing at EBREC. So yeah, that's what I would offer.
Okay, sweet. 7:45. Okay. Well, I will then share my governance presentation and just talk a little bit about our governance structures, which may cover the bylaws, but maybe not directly. It'll cover how we think about our structure and our anatomy. Does that sound okay? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna, oh, and by the way, it's East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, EB-PREC with a P. Yes. So I'll start there and maybe I'll share screen. Let's see if I can get this up. Okay. Let's see. Can you all see that right now? Okay, great. For folks who don't know, we're the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. We launched for public membership in 2000, and let me just put my timer on here. Okay, start. We launched for public membership in December 2018. But the idea was in the works since 2019, 2014, since as we watched the populations and the diversity of the Oakland and East Bay area boom, you were getting welders and circus performers and programmers and dancers and writers and lithographers. But among those, particularly those who were housed in Oakland and the East Bay, you weren't seeing Black and brown faces among this exploding population. And one of the diagnoses that some of us came to is that there were no technical, financial, or legal structures that was supporting the ownership of land and housing situations by Black and brown folks, and particularly not collectively, which is not only a historic survival mechanism for most cultures, definitely a historical survival mechanism for Black folks. Post-emancipation, along the southern coastline, we owned over 1,000 hectares of land collectively. Of course, over the next 100 years, of which we were dispossessed both judicially and extrajudicially. I'm sure you guys know this work, but if you're interested in more detail on it, please check and read Jessica Gordon Nemhard's Collective Courage, which is a history of Black cooperatives in the United States. So that was the first thing that we needed to confront, was the technical infrastructure to support collectives owning land and housing. So as we did that pre-work from 2014 all the way up until 2018, we were working not only to change certain laws, so certain securities laws like AB 816, California securities law that limited investment in a cooperative enterprise to $350. Our lawyers, Sustainable Economies Law Center and parent organization wrote a loophole into AB 816 that raised the cap from $350 of investment per person, non-accredited investor, meaning a person with a net worth of $1 million or less, to $1,000 per person, which meant that you could aggregate investment capital from your mother and your cousin, your friends and your neighbors quickly enough to put together a down payment on $1 million, $1.5 million purchase, right? You pull together 200 people, you have $200,000. You pull together 400 people, you have $400,000. And most of us don't realize it, but we all know that many people. And according to a cooperative principle, you find 200 people or 400 people with the same vision, you have a collective governance situation. So as we worked to put those things in place, we knew that the other critical element that was a source of fragility in Black and Brown and grassroots organizations is governance structures. In the sense that it's not that we are not living under a long tradition of governance structures inherited from the Western state. In fact, we're inheriting a series of traditions that is, some might argue, is really characteristic of the carceral state, bureaucratic tradition. And bureaucratic approaches, although they hold for the Western organization, that is characteristic of it is surveillance, hierarchy, oppressive power practices, secrecy. It's clear that in order to build radical, transparent, nonviolent, unique organizational configurations, we had to rethink our whole approach to organization. So our mission as the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, or affectionately known as EBPREC, is to facilitate BIPOC and allied communities to cooperatively organize, finance, purchase, occupy, and steward properties, taking them permanently off of the speculative market, creating community-controlled assets, and empowering communities to cooperatively lead a just transition from an extractive capitalist system into one where communities are ecologically, emotionally, spiritually, culturally, and economically restorative and regenerative. We don't have any given structures in Western bureaucratic practice to support a vision like this. So we, drawing from several traditions and several fields, we rethought our configuration. So the anatomy of EBPREC is really inspired, led by, and in a technical sense, guided by 5 areas across the sectors that affect where we work, which is investment, land and housing, cooperation, movement building, and land protection. So as a movement builder, we look toward on the field of protest and honor the work that organizers have done to hold space for generations. One thing you notice about many movements is that they are often poor people's movements, supported, funded by wealthy folks. But at the end of the arc, those poor people often go back to 0 assets. So East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative wants to be and wants to model for scaling across the field the organization that builds and prepares permanent assets for folks to occupy and co-govern at the end of that arc of organizing, right? And so our organizing is about building out permanent collective structures for people to access the resource well that we've accumulated as they build a radical vision for transformation. One of the other areas here, we describe it as a limited equity housing co-op. For us, the buy-in for folks is 0. As a matter of fact, it's your commitment to transformation, your time, your history, your relationship that is your buy-in to the collective purchase that we that we undertake with our resident owners. The investment co-op is clear that although we valorize individual achievement in the United States and Europe, there are no individual investments. There are no individual wealthy people. Every stock, every hedge fund is a collective investment. So the same goes for the collective ownership of assets in our community. Without a collective economic action, there is no arc toward economic resilience and economic power. So as I mentioned, we changed the law in California Securities Law 8816 for us to launch and be able to hold the infrastructure to receive capital, to buy land and housing. After about 2 years, once we were really on our feet, and part of our ethic is that we build the skill set ourselves instead of farming it out to consultants and middlemen who will take our capital and then take the expertise away with them, where at the end of that arc, we're still left with what we had when we began. We build the expertise into our staff collective so that we can continually transfer it back into our community. So after about 2 years, once we knew that we were ready to scale up to larger capital and infrastructure investments, we spent a year writing our own SEC application, where we're now federally approved to sell securities in 22 states, including Hawaii. Instead of paying a $30,000 consultant to do so, we did so ourselves, which is pretty powerful. And now we have the application and the process that we're able to share and transfer into other people's body of knowledge. Excuse me. We also look to the worker co-op to support our vision around a new way of practicing radical support in the field. And I'll talk about it a little bit when I talk about our mission pillars. But the worker cooperative provides this alternative structure and infrastructure for power sharing, for letting your mission guide your technical choices, when often in bureaucratic frameworks, our technical choices are the work that drives how well we can adhere to our mission. For us, it's radically the reverse. And finally, this whole vision is supported by the original trailblazers in the community land trust field, where we know that our work of removing land permanently from the speculative market is really about holding cultural spaces permanently, collectively, and affordably, so our communities have time to rebuild their vision for the future, as opposed to every week, every month, every year, having to pick up your bags and reorient your whole world, your history, your story, your geography. So permanence is a critical part of cultural survival. Land is the ground upon which culture lives or dies, literally. So that's the key element, is the permanence in the land. As we work on our largest project to date, which is a mixed-use commercial project, Esther's Orbit Room on a defunct historic corridor, as we diagnose what happened with that corridor, the key element to the loss of businesses, the loss of essential services, the loss of culture, is the absence of permanence in the space, where our cultural future is determined on the basis of the market, which is not a moral actor. The market is controlled by people with intentions and purposes, and very frequently in markets like ours, people who don't live, work, or are impacted by the changes the movement of capital creates. So in this, we form, in holding all these various interests, EBPREC as a multi-stakeholder co-op works according to different decentralized nodes. My background is in international humanitarianism, East Africa in particular. And I'm particularly inspired by the structure of guerrilla warfare, the headless war, where it can become, if done in the manner that activates the folks who are most concerned with the changes you're attempting to intervene in, you could create an endlessly expanding cultural and strategic culture that repeats the same narrative and the same message into every cell. And here you see the literal or metaphorical cells drawn here, where every node has a center that nourishes its intention, and is giving and exchanging information and materials with its other interconnected nodes. And just in our small sphere, we have staff owners, myself, Shira Ojan, who are the co-founders. And then we have now grown to an 11-person co-op. We're in the middle of hiring for our comms manager. The investor owners, those are the folks who invest, who buy $1 or $100,000 shares with a 1.5% projected return on their investment over a 5-year term. And they have the least decision-making power inside of the co-op, because what we really wanted to communicate is that money should not be the barrier to community control. So as everyone else has a vote on all of the elected seats, the investor owners only have a vote on the finance seat, and there may be one other seat they vote on. I don't think I have that chart in here with me today. My apologies. I can definitely follow up with you. And we post all of our bylaws for free on our website. We encourage folks to download them, to take them wholesale or in part. Any part that is important to you, we encourage you to use it. All of our work is open source. There's the community owners. That's our governance mechanism, our accountability mechanism, our transparency mechanism. These cells you see on the screen, they're meant to spin off into more groups that we call organizing groups. That comes from within the community owner body or any other owner body that has an initiative that they would like to push forward under the umbrella of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative with our guidance and support. So we have built and are continuing to evolve a process of owner group approval. Sometimes owner groups search for houses together. Sometimes owner groups want to make interventions into policy. Sometimes owner groups want to be a party group. Whatever it is your vision, if it's approved and ratified by the rest of the co-op, EBPREC supports your collective vision, because the idea is, as I mentioned, continually expanding groups that are able to come together collectively, non-violently, to advance a vision for themselves in the world. That's authentic governance. Our final group of, let me just mention for our community owners. So we want this to scale. So as I pointed out, all of our stuff is open source. We do conversations. We invite people into planning. We're transparent about our capital, how we do the work. So we give away free consulting. We support nascent groups with advice and connecting them into relationships. We do a regular community owners meeting where we let community owners bring their issues forward, and we also keep them tuned in to all of the detail, because the critical part of resource transfer, which I'll mention in a few slides, is bringing more people into the conversation than just the executive director and the finance director and the operations director. That's not an authentic transfer of skills if you cloister it inside of your professional space. That's really how the nonprofit field functions and retains power away from folks whose lives are impacted by their area of concern. And so we're trying to break that barrier, that assumption that power and resources only flow upward, as opposed to back and forth between the levels of the cooperative or the cells, however you want to think about that. Our final group of owners are our resident owners, and those are in some ways the people for whom we do much of this work. Those folks who join as owners in the cooperative, because we're anti-displacement, they are permanent. There are minimum, we have owner agreements that they're called resident share agreements that we sign. So although by legal terms, we're technically landlords, we reject the landlord tenant relationship structure. Instead, we are working to replace it with a co-design structure where for each land and housing situation, we build the resident and co-op agreement together. And we consent to the structure of the payments, the structure of minimum maintenance, the structure of long-term collective governance. So we have built out a whole resident education platform that we take our residents through over the next couple of years after we acquire together on a regular basis to build the culture, to build the emergency plan. This last Saturday, we had a community cleanup at Co-op 789. And this Saturday, we're doing onboarding to the new resident owners there, having a barbecue, some karaoke, but also some more culture building. So that is how we do ownership, where we bring balance between this idea of the entity of the organization as the power holder and the community owner or the resident owner as the power receiver. We reject that and create a multi-directional feedback between those groups. So I think that's what I was just describing. Is the beautiful and complicated dynamics of democratic governance in a multi-stakeholder cooperative, right? All of these different bodies of people. What is the benefit of going through the struggle with your crazy neighbor to collectively govern? It changes things. It's landscape changing. And we, oh, look, my little thing is out of place. Oh, look, the whole thing. Somebody must have messed with my presentation. That's what happens when you have open source. Sometimes people mess with your stuff. So we have these three mission pillars that drive and add value to the struggle of collective governance, particularly in a culture where collectivity is one of the most, we are the most culturally unprepared for collective control and collective governance in the West, right? There's so many things that have not been healed, so many things that have not been addressed, so many skills that have not been built that make nonviolent democratic power sharing very complicated. So these three mission pillars lead our technical work and continue to encourage us as we struggle through. The first mission pillar is land without landlords. As I mentioned, we reject the landlord dynamic as much as we pull toward it. So it is a struggle when you're dealing with money and land and assets and power. So land is what identity-based power hinges upon. EBPREC decommodifies and protects into perpetuity land and housing so communities have the time and space to define, rebuild, and strengthen a collective community identity. This is not an overnight thing. We're helping to found a new co-op called Black Space Cooperative, which supports Black cultural spaces with capacity building, collective organizing across the city. We sat on Zoom calls every other week for 2 years trying to build cohesion between us. 2 solid years. I'm booked out, like 40 hours a week. And I gave 2 years to just sitting on a Zoom call, like kind of fighting, struggling. And we had our first in-person convening and are working under a grant from Mellon now, 3 years later, a $7 million grant to keep building out these cooperative structures among the Black arts ecosystem in Oakland. We had no idea that that funding would flow in, but that 2 years of energy building, of aligning, positioned us to be able to receive. And honestly, we're still struggling, but we're 1,000 steps closer than we were 2 years ago. So you need time for that. And ownership of land gives time and space to slow down and think about what it means to rebuild. Culture wasn't disassembled in a year funding cycle. Culture was disassembled over the last 400 or 500 years, right? So imagine the time it takes to rebuild it. Our second mission pillar, restorative economics, is really about, it shouldn't be radical, but it is radical skills transfer. We engage communities and organizations in economic practices that reinvest in not only in the visible infrastructure of community, homes, commercial space, community food production, but also the invisible infrastructure, skill sets, mindsets, social and civic empowerment networks, technical knowledge needed to effectively self-govern communities and right ecological wrongs. Ecology here refers not just to the natural environment, but to the natural relationships between humans and among African descended people. So there's a skills transfer that comes through not excluding people from our information systems, from our musings, from our failures and our successes, and also radically sharing resources. Even if the resource is not always the co-purchase of the land and housing, there are many other scales of sharing resources, sharing people's work with others, with other funders, knowing that when you bring in a large pot of resources, some of that gets redistributed out to the community. The way you hire, the way you structure your working environment. Those are all life-giving resources, both tangible and intangible, that are critical to include in what we believe we're transferring back into our community. Our third pillar is heal people power. EBPREC fully acknowledges that just transition requires healing on the personal, communal, and collective level, since destructive economic, political, and cultural forces have disrupted our potential to evolve as humans. We reactivate our community's awareness of and access to their basic human power and potential through peer healing of social, racial, and historical wounds. As I mentioned, we could easily practice this work like any other bureaucracy as we try to build in rules for showing up, as we try to build back in infrastructure that's healthy for us, as we try to move forward all of these gritty financial and technical decisions. There also has to be attention to whether we're doing that nonviolently, whether we're doing that in a way that brings as many people forward in the power process as possible. So that means looking at our power practices, looking at our bureaucratic practices and asking us, is the ethic driving this technical choice, or is the technical choice driving our ethical and moral action in this case? Yeah, okay. So this is for us, this is about transforming relationships. We have to ask ourselves internally and externally, what is it that looks like what we used to do? And how healthy is that, right? Particularly when you're trying to cause this model to spread. So EBPREC aims to transform relationships. To do this, we need to cultivate a transformed set of relationships and nourish a broader ecosystem that will connect people and places in ways that transcend conventional notions of landlord, tenant, and owner. So for example, as I mentioned, and again, all of this is open source for sharing, We have agreements like the resident share agreement that we co-design. So we start with a slideshow, and then we populate all the critical areas around what the collective agreements are. It reflects a vision to unite with residents, cultivate belonging, and co-create transform relationships with land, housing, and each other. That when you move into our collectively owned land or housing situation, you're permanent. You're coming home, but you're coming home and making an agreement with other people who are also at home, and figuring out how to maintain those agreements long term. So as opposed to the contract, we think of this as expanding these relationships past the capital transaction. Right. And again, these are some of the initial infrastructure steps that lead to people perceiving themselves as an owner, as a collective governor of something that's often inherently experienced as separate from you. I currently live in the house I was raised in from 3 years old. This is my parents' house. I did buy it from them. But just recently, a couple of years ago, I did some major landscaping work, and I really made a huge investment into doing so. And I remember for the first time in all the decades I've lived here, I thought of this place as my land, right? As having an intimate relationship with the place because of the investment that I put in with my body, my mind, my creativity, my time. And so building these kinds of tools, if you will, into the building of the collective governance relationship are critical steps to the psychological shift from impermanence to permanence, right? From receiver to creator, from charity to mutual aid. So these small moments build up a critical mass of experience inside of the person where the light bulb turns on and they know I own here, right? I created this relationship with E.B. Preck to define how I want to live. Right. So these little steps are critical. Jumping straight into co-governance without thinking about the steps that build the emotive and intellectual and psychological state of co-governance is often where some of our fragility comes in our organizations. So another example, so these are all examples I'm doing down here, is the way that we wrote and deployed our SEC application for our Reg A offering. We're the first in the country to do so. And we're the first to do it on our own without a consultant. And through design of certain like investment objects, which we're happy to share, we've brought in the last 3 years, 3.2 million from individual, and some of our biggest investments to date have been like $200,000 or $300,000. Our smallest of which there's at least $1 million of it is $1,000 each. Those are individual people going into their bank account and saying, I believe in a future where we can control our own communities again. You can look at our offering circular on our website. It's pretty dense, but we actually did turn down some of the language so that the language is more accessible to our community. Another way of bringing people into this conversation is through this security cell. This sale of shares, right? It's helpful that we have foundations who wanted to come in at the tune of $100,000 and $200,000. But the most critical money that has come in from our launch are the individuals who bought one $1,000 share. There was a heavy lift for that, but that's where we do our organizing. Is that even your $1,000 from your bank account makes a difference to our future. That's where if you want to talk about railing against the machine, that's where we rail against the machine. Is that it's our collective economic power that is radical, that is landscape shifting, because you have to understand that all of these foundations, they didn't step forward until after our community stepped forward. They're looking to ride a bus that is already guaranteed to land at the place of success. So we must create an environment of success for ourselves and expect that foundations who have all this money to burn because they have to get it out of their 5% of their billion-dollar endowments every year will then step forward and support our vision, as opposed to following their vision and begging and picking up peanuts from the ends of their skirts as they pass by. So this critical mass of our collective body is, again, to return to the cellular metaphor, it's a system that, as we develop it and hone it and refine it, is meant to create and exchange energy, that is resources, material, on a constant basis. So EBPREC and its member owners are part of a unique ecosystem of people and projects tied together by a spirit of cooperation. Our community owners are here to grow and nurture this community and its projects. Each project creates a space that may birth yet other projects. A staff collective coordinates the flow of essential connections, education, organizing, admin work, and resources, and among projects. Altogether, we are powerful and so much is possible. And you know, when you look at intentional communities, when you look at communes, all of those work on a similar structure where we're pooling our power, we're pooling our cooperation, we're pooling our identity, we're pooling our time, and we're creating an undeniable pile of resources that then we have to train ourselves to radically exchange, keep alive, find ways to memorialize so we can spread and share to more people in more places. Okay. Here's another example of how we did that. So at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this scare that everything in the field was going to change. So we undertook like 16 weeks, every other Thursday, we would meet with our community for scenario planning, because we knew that predatory lenders were looking for vulnerabilities in the market and in our community. And we thought, why not us leverage the vulnerabilities as well? Why not be ready to jump on the same opportunities that the predators are going to be ready to jump on? So we did a whole landscape observation of the landscape to look at what our pathways were to collective ownership and what we needed to have on deck in order to land at our goal, right? As opposed to the predatory investors' goals. And this is the end result of that 16 weeks of gathering and thinking about what our opportunities were for how we build collective ownership, halt displacement, and replace it with collective power. So there are more slides, which we're happy to share. It was a long process, but not only did it really offer people comfort while we were in a very scary moment, it also brought up to the surface for many people that we can get ready like everybody else can get ready, right? If you can write policy at the edge of the law, like negative, destructive policy, you can write positive policy at the edge of the law. If you can design financial products to steal from people creatively, you can creatively design financial products to give back to people, right? If you can build nonprofit and bureaucratic configurations to allow you complete carte blanche to disassemble a field, you can build bureaucratic and organizational configurations that allow you carte blanche in reinvigorating and bringing life back to a field, right? Everyone thinks working at the edge of the law is for the bad people. Working at the edge of the law is for all the people. And it's a matter of having the technical support and the time and the space to play around at those edges. Again, as I mentioned, another part of this is this decentralized structure. It is challenging. You have to ask a lot of constant questions around how to keep a good feedback loop, because as humans, we pull towards silo behavior, siloed information behavior. So it's really a labor of love on our part, trying to figure out how to keep the information flowing between the decentralized groups and the central group. So far we have like kind of a framework for each of the circles, like how frequently they report back to the co-op, how the co-op expects to support them on a regular basis. And we're still solving for it, but again, all of those documents are available. That time, that space, that transparency is where repair comes in. We are humans, we are living in a harmful society, and we harm. No matter how good we think we are as an individual or as an organization or as an identity, we harm. And when you can acknowledge that just our mere existence can be an existence of harm, and you take a responsibility for your role, and you purposely work in concert with people who are also willing to take their responsibility for their role in harm, even when it doesn't look like it's a two-way harm, it's always a two-way harm. It's a radically transformative experience to have someone you work with say, you know, I did speak to you kind of snappily in that meeting. I want to hold my responsibility for that. Can we also talk about the thing that is happening for me in those moments of anger? And then the other person says, yes, let's talk about that too. Those are radical moments. Those are like moments when the molecules get retuned, right? But there has to be space enough, safety enough, permanence enough for us to move into that vulnerability. It's very hard sometimes for people to say, I take my responsibility, right? It's very easy to point to someone else's responsibility. And because it looks different to everybody. So if you see this little cartoon, everybody's feeling around an elephant that is the metaphorical cooperative and trying to figure out what it is and what we're supposed to be doing there. You know, some people think you're just supposed to be holding power. Some people think you're supposed to be giving all your power away. Some people think that you shouldn't have rules in a cooperative. Some people think that anything that even resonates with hierarchy is violence. Some people think that anything that resonates with non-hierarchy is chaos. So the beautiful thing about cooperatives is they're an eminently changeable structure that supports a cultural vision, right? It's the culture you build, and the cooperative is a vehicle for the culture you build. So you have to build the culture, because you can have a power co-op with hierarchy, extractive practices, racialized practices, and it can still function like a co-op. It's a vehicle, like any other corporate entity is a vehicle. It's the people that make the ride sweet. Let's see, I'm going to jump down. This is one of our projects, 2447 Prince Street. A working Black woman artist cooperative with a detached dance studio in the back. They went through 2 years of conflict. But guess what? Had ownership not been an element in this, they would have disintegrated, all moved out of the house, and the house would have been back on the market again. But we had the resources and the time to sit with them through that first 1.5 years of the cooperative. A person departed because they didn't have the emotional or time resources to sit with the conflict. We brought in 2 new members. They're sitting with the conflict and really getting their life right now. So time and ownership, permanence is the key to all things, as well as the willingness to subject yourself to the healing and the nonviolent pathway back to collective vision. And the last thing I'm going to cover is the structure of our board. Again, as another resource for time and guidance and vision protection. So we have 5 elected directors. One is the governance director. 2 is the finance director. 3 is the staff director. 4 are from our resident owners, and 5 is from our community owners. So 2 of these 5 elected seats draw, and really sometimes one might argue 3, depending on the composition of the staff body at the time. But 2 of these come directly from the folks who are affected by our daily decisions. Then we have 3 appointed seats. So we have 8 total directors. We have 3 reserved seats. One is our People of Color Housing Justice Director, which is right now appointed by People of Color Sustainable Housing Network. We have our Indigenous Director that is appointed by Segurite Land Trust, and our Black East Bay Director that's right now appointed by the East Oakland Collective. And what that does is that sets up 5 full seats that are specifically reserved either by election or by appointment by the very folks who East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative was formed to serve. So that the majority ideally always stays with the most impacted, and that we don't valorize or prioritize what eventually might come with the sort of professional skill sets of the governance director, the finance director, and sometimes the staff director. So the key to this whole setup is time and the maintenance of the mission and the ethic that allows you to slowly build in those structural, technical, psychological, and emotional moments that create coherence between the members of the co-op that lead into sound and durable collective governance over the long term. So that's my presentation for today. I hope those things made sense, and I will hand it back to you all.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm just like, oof, like, yeah, yeah, that was amazing. I also saw some like reactions, but yeah, are there any questions or reactions? See Elaine and Jai, while blown away by all the incredible information you provided, I'm furiously taking notes. Yes. But yeah, are there any questions?
I have a question. I think it's a question. In the presentation, you mentioned how we are the least prepared to take advantage of cooperative structures, and that I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we then get better prepared, and like the process of that, the resources for helping us navigate the additional layers that create obstacles to cooperative development among BIPOC folk.
Yeah, I'm actually, this is accidental that I'm in this field. I did not see this coming. I came home in 2011 to finish writing my dissertation, and I was looking around at like this nightmare landscape, like what the heck is going on here? And I started volunteering for this group called Cowrie Village, doing barter events where we were talking about the fictitious nature of money and how trust networks were going to be critical for us going forward in this country. And we had no idea we were going to land where we are right now, like on the edge of civil unrest. And if I had to argue what was the lowest lift thing one could do to prepare or start to build the comportment or the psychological state for collective ownership is small moments like that where we're exchanging trust-based resources, right? And as you find people who are your spirit animals, if you will, that those are the folks that you form what a co-op is, which is an affinity group. Are y'all both on the page of, you giving me a bushel of, that's so old fashioned, a bag of potatoes, and I'm gonna, on trust basis, gonna come back and give you some consulting on your garden? Those are the initial relationships that become the seed of cooperative economic action later. Do we all want to gather together and read Collective Courage? Like, who's going to bring the cupcakes? Who's going to write the outline? Who's going to send the emails out to everyone? Those small elements that build not only trust into your body, but the habits of collective organization with it, right? And I know a subtext to your question is the acceleration of it. And I clarified to everyone. So we were just doing a walkthrough with some funders, and they were like, oh, they're all like glittery eyed, like, oh, this is great. Can you guys do this in other cities? Sure. But nonetheless, we still need the technical front load of the radical legal structures and the radical financial structures to hold the vision as we form clarity around what is the cultural object that holds us together, right? And so there's this balance between finding your affines and the thing around which you guys have the capacity to build a collective trust ball that then you work around and mold for the next however much time. But then you also have to find the folks who want to offer infrastructure to you, right? Like our loss as Black Americans is a loss of infrastructure. Our Black lawyers are trying to survive to the point where many of them have not ideated and seen themselves inside of creating radical structures, right? The lawyers that supported us were radical white lawyers. And there are not a lot of those out there anymore right now, because even the moderate has drifted to the right. And so I think there's a balance between finding that coherence among the affines through small examples of cooperation. And then as a group, and this, I'm moving into the metaphysical range here now, as the group holding a vision where you find structures or build structures or find support to build structures that will let, this is a stinky word, but that will let that thing around which you guys connect, expand and grow, scale, as they like to say, but a slow scale, right? This fiction of rapid growth is damaging to us because we skip over critical trust building steps, critical processual steps that make us durable. And I love your rabbit, and I wish I could hug him.
Yeah, thank you. That's very valuable. It's like, I don't know, it's the more you learn, the more you like discover what you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, is that, you're on a rabbit farm? What's up with this rabbit?
This is the newest addition to the farm. Yeah, we're on a farm. And we have rabbits and goats and ducks and chickens and bees and something else I'm forgetting. Yeah. People. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it looks like you have a place from which to work and learn. So there's time.
Yeah,
yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I mean, I'm slowly, when people ask me this question that you've just asked, the thing I always return to is that body, building that body of technical skill. And so I feel like that's a longer term vision of mine, is to create a pipeline of folks who are willing to help design infrastructure that supports a new vision. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
I find myself, if someone were to ask me, how did I find myself in this position of trying to start a cooperative, I would just simply say that I'm the least qualified person to be doing this. And the only reason why I'm doing this is because there was no one else doing it.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. I was writing my dissertation. I'm a cultural anthropologist, but it turns out like it had to happen. So here I am, and it sounds like the same for you.
Yeah, I'm really appreciative of this group because it's really like filling in a lot of gaps in my knowledge but it's also like
Mhm.
adding to like what I need to scale up in.
Mhm. Or meeting your affines that have those skills and want to transfer. I mean, I
Mm,
think that's what I'm pushing, right? Is that this idea that Noni has to skill up in finance. My finance brain is not as strong as Ojan's finance brain, right? My strategy brain is crazy strong. So I often make a joke with our cooperative that between us, we're one mega executive, right? Between our 5 bodies.
mm.
So that's a recollection too, is that they make us think right? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
That we have to contain all of this in one body. And it's actually a collective of people in every situation, in Zuckerberg's situation, in fill in the blank. There's a
Right.
collective of people coming together to create this effect of an powerful leader, right? They write all the articles about me, but I'm clear that all I have is an idea and a voice. And it's all the other aggregations of vision, of passion, of time that makes it seem like Noni has founded a cooperative, but I'd still be a researcher hanging around like pointing and jeering without the rest of my people bringing what they have to bring. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, anything else? I mean, there's so much brilliance in this room right now.
I'm laughing at the chat right now. They're ridiculous.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Noni. I appreciate it. Appreciate your presence and everything you brought. Again, so sorry for the miscommunication this morning. I know Liana will be following up, and I see you on mic, Liana, so I'll just let you
Yeah,
speak.
I just wanted to say thank you as well. I know you said the slides were open source. If we'd love to get those, if you don't mind sending. But yeah, apologies for this morning, but thank you for being here and nice to meet you. This is my first time meeting you, so thank you.
No
Thank you for being
worries.
here.
Okay. I hope the rest of your day is great. Anybody has some questions, feel free to reach out to me at Noni, Noni, at ebprec.org. And if I can't answer, I'll push it to one of my co-op members who can answer. Okay. Okay, bye.
Bye, take care.
Okay, bye.
All right, y'all. I feel like we just maybe some breath work just to take that in and take a second before, I don't know, question. I'm looking at Liana. She's breath work.
Looking at me to lead. No, I mean, yeah, I know folks have wanted time to, yeah, to unpack and process. So, taking a minute maybe just to, yeah, do some deep breaths or whatever feels good to ground, and then maybe getting into some breakouts if folks want, just to talk and reflect on what we talked about. So yeah, maybe some deep breaths if people want. Inviting you to take that in. So I'm gonna go off camera, but I'll be on mic. But yeah, invite everyone to take a deep breath. Maybe 3 at your own pace. And 1 more if you haven't. And exhale. All right. So now we might get into some small groups just to kind of reflect. Might be the same ones as before, different. Just 1 moment here. All right, we're gonna go into breakouts for about 10 minutes and I will be opening them now.